Hey, good evening. Coming to you from inside. Autumn is here, so no more sitting in the garden with a cup of coffee. I am inside in the warm, out of the rain. Um, and my thoughts this week are towards young horses. I had a client ask today what were my thoughts on young horses. And I mostly thought, oh my god, I've got so many. And my first thought is I really like schoolmasters. My second thought is if I'm getting a young horse, I really want to think about how can I best prepare that horse for his future career. So, hmm, it's a difficult topic. It's not a difficult topic, but it's a contentious topic because growing up in Ireland, there was a little bit of an attitude of, well, we buy a young horse like you'd buy a kid a big coat, they'll grow into it. So we'll buy ourselves a nice young horse and I'll grow into it and I'll get to keep it for longer because it's younger. Um, I'm not sure that's a recipe for success. I'm possibly a little bit wary about the idea of buying a young horse purely so you have it for longer or it's potentially got less health problems. Um, and there is a logic to that, but then there's also the logic that you have it for longer, so you have a longer time for it to possibly come apart. Um, I really think it's worth delving into the kind of riding that I'm going to do with my young horse, and does that suit my brain? And then, uh, what particular part of that riding do I struggle with most? So, how can I give myself the most help? So, if that's going to be the backing and braking phase, if that's going to be the handling on the ground, if that's going to be the bringing it back in after it's been turned away for the winter, and really making sure that I have a plan of attack in front. That for me is just how we train horses. That isn't specific to young horses, but it's certainly much more important because you're setting that horse's blueprint for life. You are giving them the training tools to be rideable, trainable, um, good horses to be around for humankind. So you have an opportunity both ways. We want to really make sure that we're putting the emphasis on the horse's full understanding of something. So, really getting excited about the idea of those little tiny minuscule steps forward where a horse understands why he should be doing something and starts to accept and starts to become more willing. Um, Horses do come with a basic level of willingness, and that willingness is you're going to sit on my spine and hang out of my teeth. That's not enough to set a horse up for its career. You've got to be a little bit more detailed than that. And we have to be, I'm going to say excited again. We have to be excited enough to step outside the idea of making horses worldly and experienced. So, bringing them lots of places, letting them see lots of things, that stuff is really important. But what's more important is what is his body doing while that's happening. So in walk, in trot, in canter, on both sides, what happens when I use my aids and I use my signals? Does he fully understand them and does he fully accept them and do they make him better? If there is a block there, if there's a little blip or a misunderstanding or a grey area or something that needs reconfirming because he's a young horse and he's learning, we have to put that before going places and doing things. So it's I might be you could still go to competitions, but I might be concentrating on a lower level class, a different type of class, that allows me the leeway to put the focus onto what the horse truly needs, which may be taking reassurance from my rein aid or from my seat aid. So I'm not pushing the horse to the point where I'm expecting him to perform in a very perfect way, in a very consistently finished way that potentially makes him nervous of the work that he's actually doing. So I have to be really grounded, really happy in myself, really know that I don't mind making an absolute hash of it at a competition, and God knows it's happened. There's a videotape sitting in somebody's cupboard somewhere of me on a very young Irish draft horse, getting booked around in a prelim class. The same day, on another young Irish horse, entering a day and leaving at sea, um, which is fine. Well, let's try and avoid that. But we have to be grounded and sure enough in our way of riding, in our psyche, in our mindset, in our approach to a young horse, that stuff like that doesn't matter. Yeah, we can want to correct it, and by all means correct it. But we want to make sure that if our horse is telling us they need something, if they need more reassurance, that we're out of the ego well enough that we can do a transition, do a second circle, do a third circle, retire, whatever it takes to make that horse most reassured. I do remember having a conversation with somebody years ago where they told me that a horse has a finite amount of riding time in its career, and if you use it all up as a young horse, that there's nothing left for the upper levels. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I certainly know from training and teaching that I spend more time putting horses back together, more time reminding horses of things they should be confident in than I do anything else. So it makes much more sense to me, no matter how unsentimental you want to be about it, even economically, it makes more sense to do it well with a young horse so that you have less to do later on. I'd like to establish a willingness or an acceptance, whatever word you want to put on it, to a way of going before I start going. So I want to know that the horse can balance himself, he's responsible to carry himself, he's brave enough to carry himself both directions, all three paces. But more than that, for me, I want to know that a horse is brave enough to make mistakes and be able to cope with those mistakes and not either lose its nerve or get defensive. So I want to know that they can get too quick or too slow. They can fall in or fall out, lift up, stretch down, all of the things that are going to happen over the beginning of their careers, especially when we leave home, and know that they look to me for reassurance, that they don't start looking out. So if my horse is nervous and he doesn't take reassurance from my seat or my legs or my rein aids, he's going to look out, and he's going to look out for his buddies. And the downside of the show is that there's always loads of buddies. He's never met them before, but he's sure he absolutely loves them. And I've said it before, but I'm sure I'll say it plenty more times. There's always a buddy going at high speed. It's usually a little white Welsh pony at about 25 miles an hour down the top end of the arena, and he will probably try and follow him. So I want to know that he can be in a strange circumstance, he can be in a new venue, at a high expectation of competing and doing well, with a rider who's probably not as clued in as home. Things are happening in a different routine, a different order, and that's not enough to tip him past the edge. So I want an acceptance or a willingness in a way of going, tested to its best, but also tested at its worst. Having a plan to fix it, and having a horse that's happy to be fixed and to be helped. And then I transplant that way of going somewhere else. Then I might transplant it to several somewhere else's. Lots of different routines, and again, it can be different disciplines, but what I'm watching for with a young horse is that the different disciplines, or the varying of the work, is not a varying of the philosophy of riding. So horses don't need variety just for the sake of it. If a horse is getting sour, if a young horse is causing a problem, there's something he's not understanding. I don't believe in the idea that you have to do every discipline known to man to keep your horse entertained. If you're very busy trying to entertain them, there's quite a big possibility that he's being entertained by everything else and not by you. And I want to know that when I put my leg on and I close my hand, my horse is entertained enough to go, yeah, I'll give it a shot. So I would not vary what I'm doing with a young horse, how I'm doing with a young horse. I would vary where I'm doing it. I would vary at what speed I'm doing it, what direction I'm doing it. But I would never really vary the pattern. So again, I'm coming back to how can I compound, how can I build upon that basic willingness that I've established in the backing and breaking and the early stages. So there's never really too much to think about. You know, you don't have to add in anything new or anything weird or wonderful or a new set of rules or suddenly learn to be really quick brained because you already know your horse, you know how your horse reacts, and he knows how to react to your reactions. So you're not taking this entity of horse, this physical being, plonking them into a new situation. And for most of us, you know, our brains have melted at our ears. You know, we're so desperate for that 75p red rosette or blue, anyone American, which was rather annoying when I was in America sending pictures back. People wanted to know why was I always sending pictures of being second. Anyway, you know, those little things tip us over the edge. So wanting to do well, wanting to achieve, wanting to make it as good as possible, people watching, you know, there's so many reasons why we are a little bit less than we would be at home if we were a little bit more patient, a little bit calmer, a little bit more in ourselves. So I want to know that I have such a simple set of instructions, and for this horse, it might be steadying the rhythm and keeping his neck out and long and stretchy. And then that's my pattern of riding everywhere I go. I might have to work a little bit harder, a little bit quicker, but I'm not having to work differently. So I'm not worried that varying the situation for the horse is going to potentially trigger off a different reaction. I might get an overreaction, an underreaction, but the training tool should be exactly the same. So don't buy big shoes for your kids hoping they'll grow into them. I mean, they will, but it's not useful. Again, as an Irish horse kid, we saw lots of little kids with riding hats that were too big. I remember the days when you used to put a glove in the top to try and steady it out. Or body protectors that were 4 times too big and they'd grow into it, that then used to hook on the back of the saddle. Don't buy a young horse and grow into it. Buy something that fits and have a plan of attack for every single moment that you know you're going to need to be able to help him. Be prepared to be really patient, really slow, really repetitive. So lots of really simple developmental work where you're just working on physical strength. You're giving them time, not adding anything new in, not adding anything elaborate in. Be ready to analyze. Now, I think this is kind of true of any horse, but be ready to look at when it goes wrong, when it's not good, better or worse. So when it's worse, how bad is the worse, and is it rescuable? So is there something in here that I need to allow my horse to find or to experiment with? So do I need to let my young horse wobble a little bit to get a little bit more open? Do I need to let him wobble back down a pace when I try and half hold him? And so is there something within the worse, within the bad stuff, as we would probably phrase it, that is still allowing me to teach my horse the right thing, or the right mindset, or the right level of acceptance or willingness, without being detrimental? So am I allowed to let my young horse make mistakes? Am I allowed to let him develop and his body develop and let him make mistakes because things have changed for him? He's gotten stronger, bigger, faster, slower, all of those things. So it's not that we're working in perfection. It's not that we're working repeating perfection. It's that we're just truly aware of what's going on. For young horses, I want to do them when my brain is fresh. As you know, 14 cups of coffee. So just enough to switch me up a gear, but not so much that it makes me reactive to my horse. Proactive, not reactive. It's really interesting. If you're buying a young horse, I would look at its siblings. Look at the progeny. Look at the stallion, look at the mare, but look around. I mean, everything. Social media is amazing now. Somebody selling a horse, you can look back at their Instagram account 2 years ago and see exactly what that horse is doing. See, are they achieving? Are they out there? Are they competing? Are they riding? And it's not always about the competitiveness or the ambition about it, but are they rideable enough that they are outdoing things? Are they rideable enough that people are proud to bring them out, or brave enough, or feel solid enough? Or have they all disappeared by the age of 3? I'm a really bad confirmation judge. And this comes up a lot in young horses. I have a really very dear friend who is she probably won't see this video, but she's like a dowager of showing, and she's forever telling me off about horses with conformation faults. And for me, I can overlook an awful lot of these things if a horse is really rideable and trainable. I wouldn't want to coast with a young horse on it being absolutely correct and potentially unrideable. If it's absolutely correct and rideable, that's amazing, that's fantastic. But if something wasn't quite perfect, but that horse had a really good nature and was really trainable, there's amazing things you can do with it. And it's also really entertaining to see a lot of the older horses, when you strip their tack off and you see them standing in the field, how badly put together some of them are. So that's less important for me. Yeah, I mean, you want a good, solid sound structure and sound conformation. But, what happens when you push the buttons? So, pretty is as pretty does. You have to like your horse. That for me is essential. So it does need to be appealing to you. But if it's not doing what you want it to do, it doesn't matter how correct it is, how pretty it is, how much potential it has. If you can't bend it left and canter left, then it's not much worth. So I would really be considerate with young horses. I would take my time looking. I would take my time testing, and I would test very carefully. So if I'm riding a young horse, I want to see the paces. That's great. But I actually want to see what happens when you push the buttons. So what happens when you ask a little more? When you ask less? What happens when you hand over a responsibility to the horse and you ask them to do a little bit more on their own? Bringing them to the edge of all those pressure points and seeing how they respond to it. And I spend more time now as a trainer when I ride horses for clients doing that than I do finessing things. That's your homework during the week or over the month. We get on and we push the buttons and see what's missing, what's improved but not enough, what's improved but not equal to something else. And they're the kind of things that I want to know that a young horse can cope with. I saw a really truly talented rider in America trial a horse once, and it wasn't a very young horse. It was kind of middle age, but it was a young advanced horse, and she spent almost all the time in walk. And at the time I was amazed. Why wasn't she doing, working canter pirouettes, and why wasn't she doing the half passes and the tempes? And I asked her, and she was always very good to share information. She's a really talented trainer and rider still. And she said that she was able to tell so much more in the walk. And she did do very intensive walk work. So she was never just walking. She was shoulder in, shoulder out, renvers, travers, over, back, in, out, pushing all the buttons to see how did the horse react. So that's kind of where my brain is going with young horses. If you're going to buy one, push the buttons and see what happens, and then be prepared to do the work that it's going to take to help the horse understand. Be patient enough to do that. If you're doing it yourself, be ready to have a plan. Know what you're training. Not necessarily what you're training to do. I mean, keep an eye on the finish line, but how you're training. How is your horse responding? How is he taking it? Is he accepting it? Is he taking it fully? Is he relying on his athleticism? You know, we buy things with great big swingy trots now, and most of us, you know, struggle to sit on them. I know I do. So we've, you know, do we want that really big trot, or do we want a trot that we can half halt at the end of the long diagonal and know it's not going to go kaboom and try and buck us off? That's my thought. Through the videos, you're going to get a lot of overlap, because for me, a horse is a horse. We've got to have the same mental approach. We adapt for the age and the type and the discipline, but that thread, that common thread all the way through, is that we need to be really aware of how we're doing something with whatever kind of horse it is. Okay.